Hello YouTube, I'm doing a nice info type video, a top 10 actually video for you guys. I'll start at number 10. The topic is top 10 greatest presidents, starting at number 10. Number 10, we begin with our 35th president, Mr. John F. Kennedy. He was our 35th. His presidency was known as Camelot. 35th president started January 20, 1961, ended November 22, 1963. Camelot was because of the way he enjoyed Camelot, and his presidency was often reflected of that of Camelot. Funny enough, and that is why it was known as Camelot. Was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas on November 22, 1963. That's basically, Kennedy faced the civil rights movement. He faced the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Russian issue. He even potentially faced Vietnam during part of it. He faced a lot of challenges during his presidency, but that's what defined his presidency the most. Number 9. Our ninth greatest president is our 7th president, Mr. Andrew Jackson. Mr. Jackson was elected on his military policies, well, his military career actually, because he served in the army and was the victor of the Battle of New Orleans against the British. And he took and faced the Bank Free Charter Bill. He faced the Indians in Florida, well, Native Americans I should say, actually, please forgive me. He also faced a lot of many other issues. He also asserted his power as president of the terrorists. He established the modern Democratic Party. And he was the actual first authentic man to ever of the people, to actually be in the White House. Number 8. Our 28th President of the United States, Mr. Woodrow Wilson. He was the one that led us into and out of World War I. He passed the Prohibition Act. And he was also the one who ran for a second term on the old campaign slogan, "He kept us out of war." Which was true. He had kept us out of war up till then. What dragged us into the war was the sinking of the Lusitania with 128 Americans being killed, which dragged us into the war over in Europe in 1916 or 17. We entered because of that, and we ended up helping to settle with the Treaty of Versailles, which he helped to negotiate and try and win support for the 14 points. Point number 14 being his League of Nations, which would later become the United Nations. Our 7th greatest is our 34th president, Mr. Dwight D Eisenhower. He was also elected by military career for serving during World War II and D-Day. He helped to establish the Interstate Highway Act. Let me see. He also helped to establish he also quickly negotiated an end to the Korean War, sent troops to Lebanon to stop a potential revolution, created NASA, and pushed for the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1960. It was all Dwight D Eisenhower. Now, our next one has a very nice history to himself. He's our 6th greatest president, and he's also our 33rd greatest president, Mr. Harry Truman. Mr. Harry S. Truman. Came from Missouri, and parents couldn't decide on a middle name, so it was just left as S. Ended up becoming vice president under Franklin D. Roosevelt until he died in 1945 of polio. Took over and authorized the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. And pretty much articulated the Truman Doctrine, which pushed back against the potential threat of communism in Turkey and Greece, supported NATO, and even tasked George Marshall with the Marshall Plan. And that was all by Harry Truman. Our next one was our fifth greatest president and our third U.S. president, Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Mr. Jefferson was tasked with a whole different thing. He bought the Louisiana Purchase, was the first president to end up having a tie with his vice president, Mr. Aaron Burr, and it was decided he would become president of the United States, purchased the Louisiana Territory, which became the Louisiana Purchase, from Napoleon III of France, was privately funded the Lewis and Clark expedition, which explored all that territory, starting in St. Louis and going all the way up over the Continental Divide and into basically what was basically the Continental Divide of Montana, North Dakota, all the way into the Pacific Ocean. Our fourth president is our 26th, Mr. Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt served in the first volunteer army during his time as Assistant Navy Secretary and formed the Rough Riders. A bunch of cowboys, college athletes, and so on. Helped win with the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. Became president, but took and went against Standard Oil and the Trustbusters. The man was pretty much the first to ever actually start that in the Progressive era. Took and campaigned in 1912 against President Woodrow Wilson and William Howard Taft, and was shot and survived. Had his speech folded over twice, and his glasses case in his breast pocket, which slowed the bullet enough to it stopped it in his liver, allowing him to live, even though he refused medical attention until he gave his speech. Our third greatest, who is our bronze for greatest presidents of the United States, is his fifth cousin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led us through World War II, up until he died of polio in 1945. He was elected in 1932 and got us out of the Great Depression and into World War II, and we got out of that, and he died before he could see the end of the war. He was the one that created the New Deal policies, such as Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. He took and helped us get it through all. He got us through Pearl Harbor, proclaiming that December 7, 1941 was a day that will live in infamy. He took and did what he could to help us win the World War II on the Allied power side, which we eventually did under Harry Truman. And that is all for Franklin. Now we move to our second, which is our first United States President, Mr. George Washington. He is our silver nominee. He is classified that because the fact he was the one that essentially formed the United States government for which it is now. It was actually because Mr. George Washington came up with the presidency. It was because he came up with the presidency that we have a presidency nowadays. He set up the cabinet as well, with Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and that whole group. It was because of him that that cabinet came about, and will continue about for another 200 years or so years after. He essentially formed what was the United States government at that point, as well as also took and ran only 2 terms and set what would be a future presidential tradition of 2 terms, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, who served 4, because he was that popular. And our gold president, our top number 1, still, even after 150 years of being dead and alive, Abraham Lincoln. Our top number 1, Abraham Lincoln. He's our gold number 1 because he led us through the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, being elected in March of 1861 as president. Took the office as Buchanan left. Buchanan told him, "I hope you're as happy upon entering as I am upon leaving it." From James Buchanan. Basically, the only thing that can be said was he led us through that war, got us out of that, and negotiated in until being assassinated in Fourth Theater April 14 and died April 15, at 7:22 a.m. 1865. He essentially got what was the very first start of the civil rights movement, which would later come into Kennedy's presidency. He essentially was the one that created the first net income tax, created the first paper currency as well. And you can consult my little book here. And, another thing. He also was the first president to see the use of railroads in helping to elect presidents, which wouldn't come back until President Theodore Roosevelt and then Truman later on. And, yeah. So, he's the top number one president there always will be. And it's because that, I must say, that has been our top 10. My top 10 greatest presidents ever. And that is all. Thank you all YouTube so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye bye.